Welcome back to the second half of this topic about the hidden power behind the scene that has been influencing our government, military, and society for the past 125 years. If you haven't seen the first part of the series, please see it before continuing with this video because it will make more sense when you have the necessary background information. I've included the link to the first video below. In part 1, we saw how fruit corporations such as United Fruit Company were instrumental in using both our State Department, military, and the CIA to fight undeclared banana wars and overthrow democratically elected governments to put in charge dictators. These dictators were handpicked by American fruit companies to do their biddings, such as not forcing these corporations to pay taxes, stopping land reforms, shooting at their own people, etc. We can clearly see how these dictators help American companies at the expense of their own citizens and countries. And if these leaders dared disobey or betray their corporate masters in America, they too will be overthrown and murdered. Again, none of this would have been possible without the direct aid of our State Department and military acting on behalf of giant multi-billion-dollar multinational corporations. So back to our main topic of World War I and how America got dragged into this needless war which we had absolutely nothing to do with. This was, after all, a regional European conflict halfway around the world. Again, not a single German bomb was dropped on an American town. Not a single German torpedo sank an American ship, and not a single German bullet killed an American soldier. Germany was no threat to America even if they wanted to be one, because they were too preoccupied fighting major powers such as Great Britain, France, and Imperial Russia. So why did America enter the war in Europe to make it a truly world war? Why? Because JP Morgan and other American financiers didn't want to lose $5.9 billion that they lent Great Britain and France. In other words, American boys were thrown in war so the rich banksters can get their money back. You see, American banks, primarily JP Morgan, lent $4 billion to Great Britain and $1.9 billion to France, or $111.8 billion and $53 billion in today's 2024 money, respectively, so they could fight Germany and her allies. But things were going terribly wrong for them, as I have covered earlier. Germany was about to win World War I. That means both Great Britain and France would have lost the war and had no means to pay back a single dime to American banks. And remember that the UK and France were not mere countries but large empires that covered North America, Central America, South America, the Caribbean, Africa, Asia, and Australia. If the UK and France surrendered, they would probably have to give all their international empires to Imperial Germany as war booties, and thus had no way to repay their American creditors. That would be disastrous for these US banks. No way would they sit idly by while their billions get flushed down the drain, never to be seen again. These American financial institutions were just too big to fail. Where did we hear that before? The US government had to step in to rescue these highly priced banks by saving the UK and France from certain defeat. So off we went to war against the Kaiser and Germany, even though they posed absolutely no threat to the American people. On April 6, 1917, America formally entered the conflict as both houses of Congress declared war. Already by June of that year, shiploads of American doughboys began arriving in Europe, but they were totally unprepared with little combat training and even lacked firearms. As a matter of fact, America had a hard time transporting these large numbers of troops and supplies to Europe and had to resort to using cruise ships, seized German vessels, and borrowed Allied ships. It was so bad that France had to supply these new American soldiers with both training and arms. Talk about throwing fresh meat into the meat grinder. It was a total slaughter. But no matter, the banksters' money had to be saved from a German victory. So American boys were sacrificed on the altar in the name of profits. American doughboys first saw combat in the Battle of Cambrai on November 20th, 1917. The next year, American boys were thrown in the Battle of the Somme Defensive on March 21st, the Battle of Lys on April 9th, the Battle of Aisne on May 27th, the Battle of Montdidier-Noyon on June 9th, the Battle of Champagne-Marne on July 15th, the Battle of Aisne-Marne on July 18th, The Battle of the Somme Offensive on August 8th. The Battle of Ouessane on August 18th. The Battle of Ypres on August 19th. The Battle of Saint-Mihiel on September 12th. The Battle of Meuse-Argonne on September 26th. And finally, the Battle of Vittorio Veneto on October 24th. All told, about 4.8 million Americans took up arms to protect the banksters' profits and suffered more than 320,000 casualties. In the end, Germany was defeated, while France, the UK, Italy, and Belgium got to keep their huge empires, which they used to suck much-needed resources, including the millions of colonized subjects, to repay back their American creditors. At this point, I want you to think of the following questions. First, of the 320,000 dead, wounded, and missing American servicemen, how many of them were sons of Wall Street banking elites? Second, did any one of these 4.8 million Army, Navy, Marine, and Air Force personnel get a share of the banksters' profits? Did any bankster give any money to help the thousands of crippled and maimed Americans whose lives were forever scarred by the ravages of war? After all, these brave military men paid the ultimate price for the banksters' profits. Shouldn't they receive at least something? Third, why should a poor farmer from Ohio or a struggling factory worker in Detroit have to fight for the banksters, while these same banksters couldn't care less for the suffering of these average Americans? Think about these questions for a while. Now think about this. Why should we allow our government to force us to die for private corporations? Isn't the government supposed to be for the American people instead of for these massive companies? And if our government forces us to give our precious lives for the mistakes of these corporations and banks, then how can the federal government claim to be on the side of the American people? The same with forcing us to pay massive bailouts with our own hard-earned money 90 years later on. When the average American family business goes bankrupt, does our government bail it out? Why not? Is it because the little American people are not important as rich giant corporations that have money to lobby the politicians to help them while not helping the little American people?
Billions for bailouts, not a penny for taxpayers.
Person living without health care, and one of nearly 47 million of us lacking health care, it horrifies me that this country will put $700 billion to pay off Wall Street, to buy toxic assets at a horrific price.
Wow. Well, we feel like when you give the $700 billion for Wall Street, you're not going to give it for schools, you're not going to give it for health care, you're not going to give it for rebuilding the infrastructure in this country.
Thousands and thousands of us face sickness and death, but we don't count. People who are losing their homes don't count. This current bill is an outrage.
And more importantly, who are we truly fighting for when we put on the uniform, America or these corporations? Look at your children in the eyes. Do you want your son or daughter to die for them or for America? Did you raise up your lovely children to die for the super rich elites? There you have it, folks. You have seen how powerful giant corporations such as banks and even fruit companies have been using our government and military to make billions at the cost of American and non-American lives. Besides from human lives, another casualty of their selfish crime is America's reputation in the eyes of the world. If America did not enter World War I, Germany would clearly have won, and the war would have ended in 1917, instead of being dragged on another long, hard year, resulting in another million casualties. Had Germany won, there would be no Second World War, no Nazi Party, no Holocaust genocide, and not another tens of millions of lives crushed by violence and revenge. And Adolf Hitler would still be some unknown starving painter. Another possibility is the end of the British, French, Italian, and Belgian empires. Think about it, with so many British, French, Italian, Belgian, and German dead, hundreds of millions of Asians, Africans, Caribbeans, Central Americans, South Americans, and Pacific Islanders could have used this golden opportunity to break free from their hated European enslavers to gain freedom much sooner than later in the 1950s. Since America rescued these four European empires, the freedom of millions of people was delayed for 40 years. How do you think these Asians, Africans, Latin Americans, and others view America for indirectly contributing to their enslavement? On another note, if Germany won, she would most likely annihilate the communists in the East, now that she no longer feels threatened by France and England on the Western Front. The Bolsheviks were losing villages after villages, towns after towns, cities after cities, and huge amounts of land to the far more powerful German army. Even though Germany helped the Soviets come to power, the anti-capitalist and anti-monarchy ideology of communism was in direct opposition to what Imperial Germany and the Kaiser stood for. Already in February 1918, Imperial Germany, along with Austro-Hungary, launched Operation Faustschlag against the weak communist forces on the Eastern Front. Germany also helped the Finns defeat and drive out the Bolsheviks from Finland. The rest were pushed out of all the three Baltic nations: Poland, Belorussia, the Ukraine, and even Russian land in the Caucasus. Had America not entered the war, the Kaiser would have continued his crusade all the way to Moscow and beyond, and the world would not suffer the awful fate of communism. Imagine that. The world would not suffer this horrible red curse which murdered off over 500 million people. Just in China alone, over 400 million Chinese babies were forcibly aborted, along with another 100 million Chinese who were shot, beaten, starved, tortured, and worked to death by their fellow Chinese communist leaders. But the short-sighted and selfish greed of American banks, aided by our corrupt US government, prevented this from occurring. So the whole world had to suffer from communism, the most evil, most destructive, most murderous, and most shameful ideology in the history of mankind. So how do you feel about all of this? How do you feel about the world being a much better place if America didn't intervene in World War I because of greed? Now, how do you think an ordinary person from Guatemala, Colombia, Honduras, Germany, Africa, and Asia feels about all the harm corporate America has been doing upon the world simply out of its selfish interests without giving a single care who it hurts? Would this not anger the world and unite it against America and innocent Americans who have nothing to do with these crimes? Give it some thought. As we see more and more wars along with regime changes around the world as a result of corporate America's dirty predatory claws, we must all be alarmed. Even if we don't care about the suffering of people from other countries, we should for these two reasons. First, as I have already stated, foreigners will grow to hate everything America stands for and see America as a nation of hypocrites. They will be asking if America really is the champion of freedom and liberty, all the while imposing our selfish will upon others through invasions and overthrows of the governments. What ounce of credibility will we have whenever we lecture others about respecting international law and order along with human rights when we ourselves don't respect them? How could anyone trust us when we have a long list of such horrible crimes? Second, have you ever considered who pays for these wars, assassinations, and regime changes? Did the big oil companies flip the bill for the first and second Iraq wars? Did JP Morgan pay a single dime to America for entering World War I? Did United Fruit Company buy the bombs and bullets that were used in the invasion of Guatemala during the 1950s? Guess who had to pay for all these violent and unethical military operations? You guessed it, the American taxpayers. Yep, that means you and me. The little American people not only have to fight and die for corporate greed, but also pay the cost of their expensive adventures. And these adventures only benefit the giant companies whose secretive hands pull the strings of our government, military, and CIA.
37.9 million. That's the number of Americans currently living in poverty, accounting for 11.6% of the total population.
Across Minnesota, visits to food pantries, also known as food shelves, have skyrocketed from about 3.6 million in 2021 to more than 5.5 million last year. And that number is expected to reach 7 million this year.
Pandemic, we were serving about 6.3 million meals a year. We're on pace to serve about 11 million meals this year.
And it's not just the war price tax that I'm talking about. Remember the 2008 financial bailouts? Does anyone still remember what happened and what our corrupt government did? I won't bore you with all the details, but the major big banks made serious life-threatening mistakes that cost them hundreds of billions of dollars by giving loans to unqualified people who never had the means to make their monthly mortgage payments. Greed was the main driving force behind all this. The more loans they could write, the more money the banks would make. At least that's what they thought.
No! No! No!
Unfortunately for them, the number of delinquencies started from a small dribble and turned into the Niagara Falls as thousands of households defaulted on their loans and had no way to pay their mortgages. These families eventually lost their homes and the banks were left holding empty bags. These banks were in full panic mode as their very existence was at stake.
In 2008, the world witnessed one of the most devastating financial crises in modern history. What began with the collapse of the US housing market soon spiraled into a global economic disaster. Banks, once considered too big to fail, crumbled under the weight of toxic loans and irresponsible financial practices. Investment giants like Lehman Brothers declared bankruptcy, sending shockwaves through global markets. The crisis didn't just affect Wall Street, it brought entire economies to their knees. Millions lost their jobs, homes, and savings. Governments had to step in with massive bailouts to prevent a complete financial collapse. But how did it all go so wrong? It all started with subprime mortgages, loans given to people who couldn't afford them. These high-risk loans were bundled into complex financial products and sold to investors around the world. When homeowners started defaulting on their loans, the house of cards came crashing down. The aftermath of the crisis was long-lasting. It reshaped economies, governments, and the financial sector. New regulations were put in place to prevent a repeat, but many still wonder, could it happen again?
Overnight, banks were going bankrupt left and right. In 2008, there were only 26 bank failures. By 2009, the number climbed to 140. And by 2010, there were a whopping 157 bank closures. 157 banks went belly up. Even well-established names such as Lehman Brothers, Washington Mutual, IndyMac, Wachovia, and Countrywide sank, never to resurface, while others like Merrill Lynch and Bear Stearns were sold off to their competitors for pennies on the dollar. While many fell, there were others that were just too big to fail. Here we go again. Another repeat of 1917, but this time without the bloodshed. Only those banks that had the financial and political power to get the federal government to use our hard-earned tax money to save themselves from their own mistakes survived. The TOP program, or Troubled Asset Relief Program, was created by good old Uncle Sam to give these banksters $700 billion in the form of bailouts to keep these troubled banks from dying. And remember, they were the ones who got themselves into this mess due to poor business decisions and greed, but we had to pay for their mistakes. Let me repeat that. Our supposedly government of the people took $700 billion from ordinary citizens like you and me and gave it to these banking mafia to rescue them from their own blunder. Let that sink in for a while. And which banks were the biggest beneficiaries of the top bailout? They were Bank of America, Citigroup, Wells Fargo, Goldman Sachs, and what do you know, JP Morgan Chase. Wow, good job JP Morgan, still at it again, eh? When these giant banks and investment firms were making all the money in the world, did they ever share it with the average Joe Smo? Did any bank CEO living in his multi-million-dollar mansion ever give a dime to an unfortunate American who lost his home and had nowhere to live? So why should we be expected to give these rich elite banksters our money? More importantly, why should we be expected to give our lives and blood in needless foreign wars to satisfy their greed? To be fair, these banks eventually repaid the money, but we were lucky. Have you considered what would happen if they could not afford to give back a single dime to Uncle Sam? Have you ever thought about what more mess we would be in if this disaster occurred? If the federal government is heavily influenced by big business through lobbying to obey their command, then it is no longer the government of the American people. And it also means it does not have the best interests of the American citizens nor America in mind. In other words, the government is for sale to the highest bidder, while our military has turned into a mercenary force fighting for money, not the security of America. The same for the CIA, Border Patrol, and other government agencies. And speaking of the border, someone has been letting in millions of illegal invaders so they can have a reliable source of cheap labor. Forget about the national security of America and safety of Americans, as God knows how many Chinese spies, Latin American gangbangers, Mexican drug dealers, and other dangerous elements from all over the world flood into our land, endangering our nation and people, as long as these big companies can get an endless supply of low-cost workers.
Chinese transnational criminal groups seem to be targeting rural areas. What we don't know is it a threat to our national security?
Illegal weed growing operations. Not run by Americans, but by the Chinese. Oklahoma law enforcement shutting down, on average, 15 of the illegal grow houses every single day.
We believe that the people that are ultimately in control are likely in China.
Search warrant, open the door!
All right. Nice and easy.
I got him.
They say the illegal Chinese growers come across the southern U.S.-Mexico border and then travel to Oklahoma to work at the black market grow houses.
Chinese money launderers have partnered with Mexican drug cartels to efficiently launder the proceeds of the fentanyl trafficking.
Law enforcement says this drone video from another Oklahoma Chinese grow house shows people rushing to hide marijuana when police showed up, hiding the illegal pot in a shed.
Then, Mexican cartels and Chinese organized crime continue to use the United States as their middleman, with no end in sight.
Even more shocking is how investigators say the illegal Chinese growers move their product, using fake Amazon vans like this one that look almost spot on. Same make and model, same logo, even fake Amazon boxes, all full of weed.
Bolster was right. Maine is the latest hotspot among 23 states, now home to grows run by Chinese criminal groups, according to the DEA.
This nation continues to follow an alarming trend of members of the violent Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua illegally entering the United States and committing heinous crimes across the country.
Individuals, including 4 confirmed members of the Venezuelan gang Tren de Aragua, were arrested during a multi-agency raid this weekend in San Antonio, Texas.
Our government and military have plenty of resources and manpower to stop this invasion, but the corrupt politicians refuse to do anything. This is clearly a conspiracy between big government and big business. The corporations get to have millions of poor immigrants to work at low wages, while the Democrat Party gets to have millions of voters to keep them in office for the next 100 years. What a well-oiled corruption machine they have going on here. Looking at it another way, we spent a whopping $820 billion on our military in 2023. And yet we don't even know how many Chinese spies are already in our land. Can't stop Latin gangs from taking over apartment buildings in Colorado, and can't prevent Mexican cartels from pouring in tons of Chinese fentanyl to poison our vulnerable kids. So why are we spending so much money on the military if it is not doing its job at protecting fellow Americans? Why are we securing the borders of South Korea, Israel, and Europe, and not our own? However, the costs associated with illegal immigration in the forms of subsidized housing, food stamps, free medical treatments, drug flow, gang violence, reckless driving accidents, and foreign espionage will have to be paid by the American people, just like how we had to pay to bail out the banksters with our tax money in 2008 and blood in 1917. In other words, the elites get to throw a big party for only themselves, but the rest of us have to pay the bill. And the people who enforce this policy are our very own politicians from the federal government. The very people who are supposed to fight for the American people. How lovely is that? In summary, America and Americans be damned, for these corporations and our corrupt elected officials simply couldn't care less. Now, some of you might be raising up objections stating that at least these corporations and banks are American, so it's not all that bad. For all the terrible things they have been doing, at least they give millions of Americans jobs while paying taxes to Uncle Sam. But is that the case? Let's look at United Fruit Company from our first video. Remember those wonderful folks? Well, after several mergers and acquisitions, it became Chiquita. That's right, that's the same cute Chiquita dancing lady that we see on the stickers of bananas at supermarkets.
I'm Chiquita Banana, and I've come to say bananas have to ripen in a certain way, and when they're
So where is Chiquita located today? Boston, New Orleans, North Carolina? Nope. In Etoile, Switzerland. That's right, Switzerland. What can be more American than that? So after using our government, military, and CIA to do its dirty work to receive billions in profits, United Fruit Company, or Chiquita, has changed its American nationality to a Swiss one. After all that we have done for this company, they repaid America by throwing away its American citizenship and replaced it with a Swiss one. That's corporate loyalty at its best. And UFC is not alone. Burger King is no longer American, but now a Canadian company to avoid paying $275 million in taxes to America. Budweiser is now Belgian, while its competitors Coors and Miller Brewing are Canadian and South African respectively. The medical device maker Medtronic followed in Burger King's step by throwing away its American citizenship to get an Irish one, to also avoid paying its fair share in taxes to our country. Purina, the pet food company founded in St. Louis in 1894, is now Swiss. Seagate Technology, known for its hard drives, is now Irish. The iconic ice cream company Good Humor is now British. Frigidaire, the appliance manufacturer founded in 1916, is now Swedish. The pharma giant Actavis Allergan is now Irish. The tobacco company Lucky Strike is now British, and the list goes on and on and on. All these companies that I mentioned were American as apple pie, and that's how they treat their homeland, with indifference. Now what about them jobs? General Motors currently has 4 manufacturing plants, corporate offices, a regional engineering and customer service center in Mexico employing thousands of amigos instead of Americans. Ford has more than 3 dozen assembly, engine, forging, stamping, and transmission plants in Vietnam, Germany, Turkey, and elsewhere. You can name numerous other companies from the high-tech, financial, engineering, manufacturing, and food industries that employ millions of foreigners instead of Americans who desperately need these jobs. My point is, corporations have no loyalty to any country or nationality. They have no patriotism or national flags. They have no religion or culture. Their only loyalty is to their own company. Their only patriotism is love for their companies. The only flags they fly are their corporate flags. And their only religion and culture are the worship of money and pursuit of profits. Everything else is immaterial to them. They can simply close down all their factories in America and move to another country without the slightest hesitation or guilt about all the millions of Americans they laid off. And they have every legal right to do so, but they have no right to use our government, military, and other resources to make a buck at the expense of our nation, people, and foreigners. Look who built up China. Communist China before 2001 was still a depressingly poor country where hundreds of millions of Chinese earned less than $1 a day. The average Chinese was dirt poor and barely got by. On a personal note, I remember how a fellow friend in my 11th grade American history class made a joke of China being so important that without it, we won't have those little paper umbrellas to put on our drinks. The whole class erupted in laughter because that was the only advanced product China could make back then. And then on December 11, 2001, China was admitted to the World Trade Organization WTO with massive lobbying on the part of the American textile industry. From there, the floodgates were wide open and massive amounts of foreign direct investments from Wall Street poured in. Trillions and trillions of dollars transformed China into this monster that it is today. And it has been making much more than just those little paper umbrellas. It now manufactures electric vehicles, advanced weapons, supercomputers, solar panels, microchips, electronic devices, appliances, and other products that only the West made decades ago. All of this was possible because American corporations shut down their factories to reopen them later in China. American know-how showed the backwards Chinese how to be modern as the West.
Chinese hackers targeting America, but why? And how can they be stopped?
China's hackers are a source of friction between Washington and Beijing. Alleged cyber attacks from China have angered the U.S.
Now, according to a new report, Chinese hackers breached the networks of the U.S. broadband providers. Reportedly, the hackers also accessed systems used.
China-backed hackers have breached U.S. internet providers in order to spy on Americans. That's according to the Washington Post.
The Chinese would also either steal or force these corporations to transfer their intellectual technology to them. Soon, Chinese firms would use these American intellectual secrets to make cheaper versions of their American products at a fraction of what it would take American companies to do so. I have covered this on another video which you can enjoy. You can find the link below. Human rights advocates and anti-communists screamed at the top of our lungs to stop this dangerous move before it was too late. Remember that we were at war against China less than 50 years before that in Korea, and China has always regarded everything we stand for as targets to be destroyed. In simple terms, China hates America and anything American. So why, oh why would our corporations want to enrich and arm our number one enemy? Remember what I stated earlier about these companies having no patriotism or loyalty? Yeah, those and greed.
It's really extraordinary how they've pulled themselves up from almost nothing to being an economic superpower. And we did this too. We're the ones that gave them the blueprints. We're the ones that gave them the tech. We're the ones that shipped it all overseas. And I'm part of the problem. I'm one of the guys who did it. What a call.
Today, Red China poses a serious threat towards America and our allies in the region, thanks largely to Wall Street corporations and the pursuit for their single focus for profits. When one of my team members asked me what is the solution to this colossal problem, I honestly replied that I have none. The corporations are so gigantic, powerful, loaded with cash, and well connected that it's almost impossible for America to escape out of their grip. Perhaps I spoke too soon, so here's what I propose. First, we need to immediately implement reforms on lobbying. I made a video on this topic, so please enjoy watching it. I will leave the link to it below. New laws limiting the influence of special interest groups on our government will greatly reduce the corruption on Capitol Hill. This will make it much harder for the super rich to transform their wealth into political power to get the wars, regime changes, bailout, and special laws they need to make more money. Everyone should be treated equally by our government, regardless of how much money they have. Again, I highly encourage you to watch my video about lobbying. Second, we need more transparency and press coverage. Information about how the super elites are abusing our society by corrupting our government agencies must be made widespread to motivate the public to take action. I talked extensively about OpenSecrets.org and Represent.us and how these two nonpartisan organizations are leading the fight for greater transparency in our government. Feel free to visit these two sites to get the latest information about what's currently happening in the halls of Congress. They also have great videos where you can learn how our government operates. Third is taking action. We are lucky to live in the digital age of YouTube, Instagram, Reddit, and personal websites to get our message out much easier, faster, and to more citizens than what we had 30 years ago. So let's take advantage of this golden opportunity. We can inform, energize, and organize millions of followers to make an impact on Capitol Hill and the White House. So let's get going. Fourth, we need to elect people who are not part of the corrupt system. People who are true patriots and not tainted by money or power must receive our vote and support because they are genuinely motivated by patriotism and love for the American people, not personal selfish gains. In conclusion, we have seen the enormous control corporations and special interest groups have over our government and society, and corrupt politicians are more than happy to receive blood money so they can spend it on election campaigns. This is truly a broken system that needs immediate reform. But there's always hope that we can clean up our nation and get things back to normal. We will take back our government and nation from these powerful elites and free the American people from corruption and greed. Please support my channel by smashing the like and subscribe buttons and sharing it with other concerned patriots. I can't thank you enough, and may God bless us all. Amen.